Samantha, the news over the weekend that BP managed to get this tube inserted into the riser pipe and siphoning off, according to Doug Suttles, who we talked to last hour, about 1,000 barrels a day. Is that encouraging news to you?
Very much so. I mean, this is a very difficult engineering problem, and I think the fact that they've managed to insert a siphon pipe successfully and pull off, even though in the beginning what might appear to be a small amount of oil, 10 to 20%, hopefully that can increase over the coming days, and they can reduce the oil that's getting into the water column of the Gulf.
At least that's something. We want to talk about these plumes underneath the water in the Gulf. I mean, they're huge, 10 miles long, 3 miles wide, what, 300 feet thick? I mean, is this worse than the oil you see on the surface of the water?
It's very hard to say because we don't exactly know the oil content of the plumes. We know that they're rich in colored dissolved organic matter, and colored dissolved organic matter is measurable with a special instrument that we have on a CTD array that we lower down through the water column. The problem is that there are other compounds in addition to oil that generate signatures on the sensor. So it's impossible to say how much oil is in the water, but oil is certainly a component of colored dissolved organic matter. So we have samples that arrived late last night here in the lab, and we'll be analyzing them over the coming weeks to determine the oil content. The plume itself is a very interesting feature. Nothing like it has really ever been seen in the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico before, and it's not only a large feature, but it's a very complex feature. There's a lot of vertical structure to it. So it's not something we can explain. It's certainly not something that we expected to find. We don't understand it at this point, but hopefully in the coming weeks, when we really have a chance to analyze all the samples and the data, we'll have a better picture of the implications of what this feature really is.
Yeah, Samantha, I guess initially it was thought that any of the oil that was coming up from the bottom was making its way to the surface and became part of that surface slick. But if you've got it caught between layers of water, different temperatures or whatever, and striations, I mean, it's probably not going to get out of there anytime soon. So what are the long-term effects here on sea life, on the oxygenation of the Gulf of Mexico? You got a whole lot of oil in there. It's obviously going to have a pretty profound effect.
Yeah, we can make some statements regarding what the implications are, but again, we don't have a very good constraint right now because we don't have rates of processes yet. We'll have those in a couple of weeks. So anytime that you inject a large amount of organic matter into a water body, you stimulate microbial consumption of that organic matter. In this case, and this is the same for the surface water and the deep water, you've injected a lot of oil and methane gas into the system, so the microorganisms that degrade that material are going to be stimulated. Most of those microorganisms use oxygen as their terminal electron acceptor, so the consumption of oil and methane will result in the drawdown of oxygen from the water column. The plumes that were documented on the Pelican cruise had oxygen concentrations of about 5 milligrams per liter. That's about 30% less than water outside the plume, which is about 7 milligrams per liter. That concentration, 5 milligrams per liter, is more than sufficient to support animal life. Animals are not at all stressed by oxygen levels in the plume at this point. What we don't know is how those oxygen levels are going to change over time, and how fast or how slow they'll change, and how fast they'll recover back to the background levels. Those are just things that we really have no way to predict at this point. If you think about long-term consequences, if the oxygen levels get drawn down in the deep water to below 2 milligrams per liter, then it could take some amount of time, probably a long amount of time, years or longer, to rejuvenate the oxygen concentrations down in the deep water, just because it's so separated from the surface water.
That's scary and fascinating at the same time. Samantha Joy, thanks for joining us this morning and explaining the unexplainable at this point. We appreciate it.